Eric, what's
Not much, not much. Living the dream.
so I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit. I see quite a bit of it's coming my way, and they're all delightful, but yours stopped me in my tracks. This was like a couple months ago, I think, maybe longer. I think the first sentence was, I booked 43 meetings in 1 month over email, which I thought was a sentence that really caught my attention, which is, and 40% of those actually closed into revenue.
Yeah.
Congratulations, man. That's a pretty big accomplishment given how crowded inboxes are.
Yeah, no, it was pretty crazy. It happened a little while back, and I didn't want to share too much too early because it was working very well for me. And I know the email outreach game is tough. And so yeah, after a little while, I thought, you know what, let's share this, see if we can help some people. But yeah, it was cool. It was very cool.
Appreciate it. I know the community appreciates it. By way of introduction, tell us a little bit about you, what your role is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the SDR team lead at Cladara. We are a Series A backed fintech out of London. Well, originally founded in Barcelona, but now we're in London and Denver, Colorado. We basically help companies manage all of their software subscriptions. So we show them all their software in one place. Myself, I used to play football, and that is pretty much all I ever did. However, I should probably clarify for your main audience, it's soccer, not to be confused with American football. So I used to play that out in Florida, where I transitioned from university to pro football. And then once that finished, I decided to get into an SDR role, and I moved to London to do so.
Okay. All right. So before we into soccer, I mean, who's going to win the World Cup first off? Who are you picking there on that?
I mean, it has to be come back to England. I have absolutely zero doubt.
Zeroed out. All right. So good. So before we actually get tactical, which we're going to get, I think it really helps and a little bit more about the prospects that you're reaching out to, and specifically the job done before they or before they give you money, and the problem with the current way. So if they were to keep doing it the way they're doing it, what terrible, no good, very bad thing happens? I think it'd be helpful to get to the top. And I know you probably sell to lots of different people, but for the purposes of just wrapping our heads around this a little bit,
Mhm.
what's one title that you typically sell to?
Typically, I would say CFOs, so any head of finance, really.
Okay. And what types of companies do you typically target?
So we mainly target fast-growing companies, so companies that have a lot of change within them. That typically tends to fall on venture-backed companies just because they get a lot of funding, they tend to grow very fast. But that also happens with bootstrap companies. So for us, it's really any company that sees quite a big dynamic change. That's kind of as a salesperson, that's my favorite to reach out to.
Okay. So these are people maybe that are like in growth mode, they've gotten funding, salespeople.
Yeah, absolutely. Hiring anybody really, because more staff means more software. That's kind of where we jump in to help.
Okay. So this is a company that has lots of different pieces of software. They might have HR, financial software, they may have sales software. They've got software for lots of things. Maybe they're using seven or eight, nine, 10 different pieces of software. And you
Yeah.
mentioned managing the software. Can you tell me a little bit about what you mean by that when you the job they're trying to get done specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I don't know about you. If you're anything like me, you've probably signed up to a couple free trials in your time, and then suddenly, 2 weeks later, a month down the line, you forget you've done it, and a payment comes out your bank account. Now, on a personal level, that's something we've all experienced, but this actually happens with businesses as well. They sign up to free trials of tools, they may be testing something out, and then suddenly they've been charged. So that's kind of one thing that happens when people grow. On the other hand, when companies start growing fast, it can be very, very easy to lose track of who has access to what software and what tools you actually have. So we see a lot of instances where someone will come into a role and they'll say, "Hey, do we have this software? I need it to do X, Y, Z." And someone says, "No, I don't think so." So they then go and pay for it on their CEO's credit card. And then suddenly 2 months later down the line, they're like, why did you buy that? We already have it. And yeah, that's kind of what we see a lot. So manage
It's
it,
so,
I think. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Josh.
I mean, it's so interesting. I just experienced this not too long ago. I realized that my wife and I both had subscriptions to Hulu, like premium
Yeah,
subscriptions. We didn't even
yeah,
realize it, but and God knows what else. Like, I guess this happened
yeah,
with, I know personally, but in business, it's interesting. This happened to me as well in business. So I had signed up for Zoom webinar. I
yeah,
don't remember signing up for it, honestly. Maybe it was on some promotion. I was going to do a webinar. I kind of completely forgotten about it. And then it went to renew, and I was like, whoa, I don't even use this thing anymore. And it was very difficult to unravel that, even though I had contacted the company literally the day it renewed. They're like,
yeah.
hey, that's not how we roll. And eventually I was able to get a refund, but it was like, it was a problem. So you're able to proactively monitor when subscriptions are coming up to notify people before they get dinged again.
Exactly. Yeah. So we can notify you exactly when the payment's due, or when your free trial ends, and then also when you're usually people pay on a monthly subscription, but we can also show you any quarterly, annual, whatever payment period it is.
And how are people managing this today? Is it mostly like in spreadsheets? Are they, or maybe not even doing it at all? Or
Yeah, it kind of varies. Some companies do it just through their accounting software. So at the end of the month, they might just run a report and then see what subscriptions they're paying for. But most of the time, we do see it being managed on some sort of spreadsheet. Now, it's not a dreadful way to do it. Like it works for a lot of people, but as you start to grow, it's just not something you can scale up really.
I understand. What's the tipping point there? The problem's not really big and intense if I have like four pieces of software, but
Yeah.
if I have like 15 or 20 and I got a lot of people, I have a tipping point where all of a sudden it becomes a bigger problem.
There is, I think it varies. What's super interesting about people is it varies per person because a lot of people have such different tolerance to like it being a pain. Like for some people, just having to check once a month is enough for them to be like, I just can't be bothered to deal with this issue. And some other people think, well, I'm growing super fast, I have bigger problems, so I'll deal with this later on. But typically, we tend to kind of companies kind of feel it once they're at like 18, 20 employees. And at that point, they're starting to have quite a few tools with different departments, things like that.
And do you have typically cost? I know there's a product out there called Truebill, which is I
Okay.
think a direct to consumer version of this that monitors subscriptions you have active and allows you to sort of cancel with a click. I think they have like a concierge service or something.
Hmm.
And they have some claim, I think, on their website where people are typically overpaying by like, I don't know, $500 to $700 every year on
Yeah.
subscriptions they forgot about. It's a pretty alarming stat. And I know, do you have a sense of what the cost of this problem is if left unchecked?
Yeah, so we typically see people cut their software bill by around 25 to 30% within them joining Cloudara. Now, to me, it's quite a staggering number, especially if you're a larger business spending, tens of thousands of dollars a month on software, which a lot of people do. So we typically see it's around 30%.
Wow. And I guess the tricky part is you don't know how much software they're using until you have some intelligence that allows you to gather maybe based on tech stack or code on your website, different software so that you can limit your approach. Because I mean, your response rates are super high, which I would imagine you're doing a really bang up job of pointing in the right direction. So
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit about how you put that initial list of prospects together.
Yeah, so in terms of, sorry, can you just clarify a question? Is it in how I put the prospects together or how we kind of figure out the tools and stuff?
Yeah, I'm tasked with trying to start new business over email. One of the first steps is I got to know who I want to reach out to. And it seems like based on your response, clearly we're going to get into the messaging and your approach there, but
Hmm.
you have to probably point the emails in the right direction, meaning you spend some time thinking through who you want to reach out to. To your point earlier, it's not everyone. Someone that has one piece of software and five people, probably not going to be a fit. So
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit about your process for how you build up a list of people. What do you use to take an educated guess of, I think these people are experiencing the problem because they have maybe 18 pieces of software or X amount of people? How do you think through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, starting out with, there's a really cool tool, you might have heard of it, called Built With. And Built With can basically scan a website and see what tools are linked to building that website. And so that's kind of a good indication of how much a company is using software. And it also gives you a good indication of kind of how much they're spending, because you know certain tools like HubSpot and Salesforce, these are expensive tools. And so if you see a company is using those on their website, you can make a good guess that they're going to be using a lot of other tools and spending money on this. In terms of finding them, back when I made this post, when I was so successful, we used a tool called Apollo. Um, and on that, you can just make various searches based on lots of filters, very similar to like Zoom Info, Cognism, and a lot of data tools. At the time, I'd booked, I'd made a sequence around some funded companies in the Benelux because I was working the Benelux, and one of the companies, StudyTube, who was the highest funded edtech in Netherlands, booked a meeting with us and ended up becoming a customer. So once they became a customer, I read into more like the edtech scene in Netherlands, and it was absolutely like booming for them. It was going really, really great. And so I thought, you know what, let me build out a cadence to loads of other edtech companies. They're all going to know who StudyTube are because they're kind of the leaders in that space. And let me just see if they are experiencing the same issue. And then obviously they were, which was great. Well, for me, not for them, but it's great they got a solution now.
Yeah, you sort of double down once you got some traction, which brings me to my next question. I would imagine, or correct me if I'm wrong, you sell to maybe different types of people. You mentioned CFOs, but maybe there's other roles. Do you
Absolutely.
think about segmenting by role, or is it really the same message for everyone?
No, absolutely. We do alter message based on role because kind of the beauty of what we do is we kind of bring finance and IT teams together because there's kind of a big disconnect between those two departments. And because we do both, we reach out to a lot of finance personas and also a lot of people within IT as well. And then sometimes even founders and CEOs. So the messaging does alter. With finance, it's going to sound silly, but it's all around the financials of how we can forecast your spending, kind of predict your future spending, let you know with renewals, any duplicate tools you have. And then with IT, it's kind of a more security and usage led approach. So we can show you how much each tool is actually being used. So you can see, okay, we have this tool and this person really shouldn't have access to that. And we didn't know they had access to that. And so kind of how we deliver the message based on persona does alter. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's get into that. So we'll talk about finance, the CFOs you mentioned. And I
Yeah.
know sell to CFOs, and I know one thing they hate more than anything is overpaying for stuff that
Yeah.
they didn't know they had. So I love so let's talk a little bit about CFOs. We
Mhm.
now know the types of companies. We now know the roles. We have a sense of the hypothesis in terms of the problem. Talk to me about what's next. You sit down in front of a email sequencing tool, maybe like an Outreach or
Yeah.
let's just say a Google Doc for now, and we're going to
Yeah.
write like email number one. Walk me through your thought process of how you start about writing this series of messages. Like, what's the first thing you do?
Yeah. It's a great question. I I suppose when I'm thinking about writing an email, from what I've learned, and I still have a million things to learn about like being an SDR and sales outreach, which is why I love it so much. But I typically tend to go with leading with a problem that I've noticed or something I've noticed that could lead to a problem. Just because it tends for me, I see it grabs a little bit more attention if you lead with something, because something like an issue, because in the email, yours obviously have the subject line, but then you also have the preview text, which shows like the first 15, 20 words. And so for me, that kind of first sentence is key to get that email opened and to continue the content. So the first thing I'm thinking about is, okay, what have I noticed or what have I found about this company that's made me reach out? And that's kind of how I lead it out initially.
Okay, great point. So you control it. First 20 or 30 words, you control it. You don't control who it's being sent from. Obviously, you're going to be a stranger, so there's nothing you could do
Yeah.
about that. But give me an example of like, let's start with the subject line.
Yeah.
Reaching out to CFOs, and we've done some research on Built Wolf. Looks like we're using some different types of technology. What do you put in the subject line specifically that you notice has been working for you? Because again, if you're just fast forwarding here, Eric's able to get a 40 response rate on his cold emails. I'm sorry, booking about 40 a month email, and also closing about 4% of those deals. So not just booking meetings, but closing them. And we can't get to any of that unless someone's actually opening the email. So anything that you've learned with regards to subject lines, maybe some examples you can share.
Yeah, absolutely. From my experience, bar one subject line we use, the shorter the better. I find and no punctuation. I'd never really include punctuation. So my favorite since I've been SDR for Cladara is just the word growth in lowercase, like all in lowercase. To me, it's always something that whoever you're emailing is going to be interested in some way. And so, and it to me, it looks very inconspicuous. The word growth in lowercase does not look like a sales or marketing email at all. And so for me, it kind of that's always performed relatively well.
Now, listen, if your solution has nothing to do with growth, don't just be pasting in growth in your people, just context matters. Okay. So now we get to the first sentence. And you had mentioned that you're looking at something about the company. Are you referencing their tech stack? Are you saying, hey, noticed that you're using X, Y, and Z? Or talk to me about that first sentence. Maybe give me an example.
Yeah, absolutely. So because of our product, companies purchase their software through Cladara, and we collate a lot of data on how much people spend on their software and how many tools they have. So the real benefit to being an SDR at Cladara is you can make a really good assumption on how much they're spending and how many tools they have based on size, industry, etc. And so along with the info you can get from Built with on certain tools, you're able to build quite a nice first line out. So we may say something like, hey Josh, noticed on builtwith.com that inside selling now has 23 subscriptions, including X and Y. And that's kind of how lead out.
Yeah, that's going to really get attention. And the reason I like that too, Chris Voss talks about this. I just days with him in Nashville. For those that are not familiar, he's the author of Never Split the Difference, former FBI negotiator, great book. He talks about labeling. So, it looks like you're using these tools and you have these software subscriptions. The interesting thing labeling or pointing that out is that if you're wrong, people love correcting. So they'll say, well, we're not using outreach, we're using sales conversation. So even if you mislabel a little bit, it's a very powerful technique to take a shot in the dark. It's not really intelligence tools, but the fact that you're actually naming tools specifically and specific software rather than saying, notice you're using some tools. You're using SalesLoft, you're using outreach. Hey, you guys, you're using both. So, being very specific there, I could see where that's going to do its job. And the job of the first sentence is to get someone to read the second sentence.
Yeah.
Famous copywriter, came up with that idea, which is a great way to think about it. It's the job of each sentence is to get someone to read the next sentence. So we have this subject line growth, piques curiosity. I open it up, and now you're talking about my tech stack. And I'm like, why is this is very relevant. So now we go into sentence 2, and I would imagine paint a picture of the problem in some way.
Yeah.
So let's talk about sentence 2.
Yeah, absolutely. So just quickly on what you said as well, I think the reason that first line also leads on so well is because, like you say, with the tools, people like to correct. It's also the same with the number, because if you overestimate, they're going to tell you, well, I don't have that many, so it's not a problem. And then equally, they also might be sat there thinking, well, I thought I only had 15. Do I really have 23? And so it piques that curiosity to then continue reading. So with the number and the tool, and I think that's why it works quite well.
And what's also great about this, and Will Atkin over talks about this as well, and data on this is That looks really good on a mobile phone. Like you see that on, you have 23 licenses of sales left. You're like, holy shit, do I only have like 10 people? What are we doing here? Right. Like
Yeah.
that. And again, the desire to correct is going to kick in. Also, what you said, it's almost like planting a seed of potential doubt in my head
Yeah.
where I have to think, you're sort of making the prospect. So second sentence.
Yeah. So I've said that first sentence, and I usually end it with, and this is because if they're growing, I usually say, and this is probably growing all the time. So you have these number, include an XYZ, and this is probably growing all the time. Um, and
Can
then
we stop there for a second?
Yeah,
Something I love
absolutely.
about that, and it's very subtle, but I think it's an important call out, and it's growth time. What that doesn't sound like is then we streamline and optimize your solution, right? It's very casual language. It's almost very like chill.
Yeah.
I talk about this with cold calling all the time, where I talk to SDRs and they're not doing cold calls and they sound just like normal, chill, conversational. And then we get this sales voice that kicks in when we get on a call where we
Yeah.
sound so serious. And so most of the work that I do with teams, getting people to be more conversational. So on a cold call, hey, John, I have no idea what your process is. Was talking to a couple Annas last week and we saw that they're doing X, Y, and Z and was wondering like, how are you guys doing that? Like, how are you guys doing it? Was talking to a few, and it's the same thing with that line that you just said, and it's growing all the time. Like that's a very conversational line. And I think
Yeah.
conversational writing is much more inviting than formal writing because it just hits differently.
For sure. For sure. And it's also a lot shorter. Like when you're speaking casually, instead of like using going to, you might just write gonna. And the whole tone of the email shifts and it shortens, and I think that's only a good thing for cold emails.
I love that. I love that. Okay. And the other thing that line, it also makes the problem bigger, right? Because it's like, yeah, it probably is getting more expensive every month.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like the brain doesn't have a choice but to read the next sentence there. The curiosity is just so peaked up.
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep going.
Yeah. So then once I've done that, I usually address that this isn't something, I need to word this correctly. So what I say is, like we understand, or I understand that having control over these can be really difficult as you scale. Or I've spoken to so and so who's had this challenge as they've scaled. I've kind of played with the two lines, and weirdly, I don't see much difference. And so I tend to stick with, we understand that, keeping control over these can be really difficult as you grow.
Keeping control. Does that speak? What do you mean by that? Do people know what you mean by that? Because that seems to me at certain a little vague. Like, what do you mean keeping control?
Just in the sense of, imagine you go to like the park with your kids. If they're out of control, they're like here, there, and everywhere. And now you've said it, I probably will change this tomorrow thinking about it. But for
Don't
my
your
no
conversion
no
rates. You're doing
no
that
not
well.
at all. I'm just thinking about it. When we say control, we just mean like to keep them in check, like to keep them manageable, like to them not to get too difficult to deal with.
hmm
But I definitely, yeah, there could be a better word for sure.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that again, I don't want to mess with your success here, but you might want to say something to the effect of what that problem ends up costing.
Yeah,
Seeing that really overpaying by 20 or 30% in software fees that they didn't really forgot about or didn't realize,
yeah,
and then sort of we build identify those so you can catch them before they happen, or et cetera. But it's almost like you want to communicate at a more crispy level.
yeah,
Losing control, you can make losing control then dash, i.e., overpaying for software they
yeah, yeah,
forgot about, something like that.
yeah, yeah,
All right, so let's go from the beginning. Let's read the first. Let's just go through sentence 1 and 2 together, just so you can see how this stitches together in the next sentence. So we have this
yeah.
trigger event that everyone talks about, but this one's really different and very specific, and it's almost like crack. Go through that first sentence again, Eric, just so people can see how it stitches together.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey Josh, noticed on builtwith.com that Inside Selling now has at least 33 software subscriptions, and this is probably growing all the time. We understand this can be very difficult to keep control of as you continue to grow or as you continue to scale.
And do you mention the actual software subscriptions? Do you mention like, do you take
Oh,
an
yeah.
educated stab at what those are?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Sorry, my bad. So yeah, on when we review builtwith.com and it labels some tools, we say, notice you had 23 software subscriptions, including Sales Loft and Zoom Info. And these are probably growing all the time. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So then once we've labeled the reason I've reached out and then what the problem is, which is it's very difficult to keep control as they grow, I tend to then ask a rhetorical question. So it is a question, but I don't end the sentence with a question mark. I leave it with a dot, dot, dot. And that is, what if you could see all your software in one place, giving you full visibility and control?
Mm-hmm.
And then followed by that, sorry, just because it's tied in, followed by that is then a picture of the Cloudara dashboard, which then shows you a list of your tools, the finances, that sort of a lot of information on the picture.
Yeah. So this is interesting. So addition to this, and again, I don't want to mess up what you're doing here, but where my
Yeah, yeah,
mind went was, I almost want you to say, so that you can. If you could do this, so that you could cancel subscriptions you forgot about, or you can, you see everything in one place, so that you're never forgot about, or you're never having more licenses than you need, or you're never having that
yeah,
already have subscribed. It's almost like there's this, so that this terrible thing doesn't happen. But I
yeah,
love that. So the rather than talking about it, you actually get to see like a view of what I'm perceiving as all the software listed, so you can see exactly how many license stuff is due.
exactly right. Because the one thing I've always been mindful of is I never want to bombard them with too much information,
Hmm.
because people just switch off, right? And that's the beauty of an image is we you can process so much information from an image that doesn't feel like the same effort as reading.
Yeah,
And so I think it'd be really, yeah, super powerful.
love that. Love that. Yeah, I a couple weeks ago, I think on LinkedIn, I was doing some work with a company and showed like how you can use bar graphs to
Yeah,
communicate a point. To your point, images, the brains just process information differently that way. And a lot of people will say, well, don't, would love to get your take on this. My take on this is sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But they always get
yeah,
blocked if you don't.
yeah. I don't see since I've been in SDR, so in the 18 months we've been doing it at Cloudara, we don't see a difference in open rates and deliverability with emails that have an image versus emails that don't. Now, it might be different predominantly in the US because a lot of the outreach at that time was in Europe, but we don't particularly see a difference at all.
Yeah. Okay. Good. That's good to hear. Okay. So what kind of call to action after that, or
Yeah, yeah. So it's with this particular sequence, it was simply just open to a quick chat question mark.
open to a quick
Um,
chat? Okay.
yeah, but recently that's kind of I've shifted that a little bit.
So
Similar to what you said earlier about explaining kind of the result. So it's like we go through all of that, and then it's like we helped James at X company save this. Are you open to seeing if we can do the same for you? So rather than asking for a call, it's like, do you want to find out if you could get the same thing?
so showing like a little social proof there
Yeah,
through third party credibility. Okay. Let's stitch this all together again, and let's just get a sense of. And I'm gonna have Eric kind of read the email just so you can get a sense of it. And when you're listening to this, understand the underlying framework. Eric's doing a really good job of him explaining why he's doing what he's doing. And it's the psychology behind why he's doing what he's doing that will allow you to apply the thinking to your prospects. What you shouldn't be doing is copying his email and sending it to your prospects, because you're not selling the same thing. But what you can do is understand his thinking, his thought process, and then apply it to your audience. That's the key thing here. So as we're going through this, think about the underlying psychology behind the template, so to speak, not just ripping off his words. So Eric, go ahead and let's go through the whole email one more time.
yeah, yeah. So, hey Josh, noticed on builtwith.com that Inside Selling now has at least 33 software subscriptions, including SalesLoft and Zoom Info, and this is probably growing all the time. We understand managing these subscriptions as they grow can be really challenging. What if you could see all your software subscriptions in one place, giving you full visibility and control? Here's how that might look with Cladara, and then we display the dashboard. Open to a quick chat to see how we might help.
Or maybe there's a sentence there, Acme and Beta was able to save 20% on their subscription costs in the first year, interested in learning how, something like that. I love that.
Yeah.
Now,
exactly.
What about in terms of, so is the response, are the meetings being booked on that first email, or is it, you have a sequence going on after that, or what happens after that email?
Yeah, so I do have a sequence. For the post specifically on LinkedIn, 30 of them booked off the first step. The rest built it in through different steps as we went on.
So what's the second step? Is it like some kind of a bump email or?
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty much a GIF of me sliding through the office on my chair with the Cladara logo in the background with a board on that says any thoughts. Yeah, that's my second step.
Because if you can slide with the GIF, if you have those skills to be able to create a GIF of you sliding in with a thing that says any thoughts, why not do it? Okay, then is there like a third? How many touches in the sequence do you have?
At the time, it was 6.
Okay, so what do you do? Let's say step 3. So you've done this initial email, you've done got animated GIF, any thoughts thing, and now you have step 3. What else are you saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first email is focused on the most typical problem that people face, which is the number gets out of hand and it's difficult to manage. So then as we go through the sequence, I'll focus on like different value propositions. So the first one was, okay, can you see all your software in one place? And then the third one will be based around wasted spend. So highlighting duplicate tools, unused tools, focusing on a different problem.
So I love this. This to me is again a huge mistake I see people make all the time, which is I call it they make all their chess moves in one email.
Yeah.
So they have these 3-4 ways in which they could potentially help people, and they outline it all in this meeting, and then they have nothing to say. So I love what you're saying here, which is make one chess move per email.
Yeah.
One problem per email, because brains really can't zero in on more than one thought or idea, and you have multiple touches in your toolkit, so you may as well drip them out slowly. So I really love what you said there. What did this experience? Do you mix in any cold calls, or is this just all email? This 40 meetings that you're booking. I'm sorry, 40 something meetings that you're booking, and the 40% conversion rate. Is this all through email, as your post suggested, or are you also mixing in calls?
No, at the time it was purely email.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are you mixing in calls now at all, or are you sticking with email?
At the moment, as a team, we're predominantly email, LinkedIn. We are testing cold calling in our US, like account executives are kind of piloting that. But when we started out, we were just like email outreach, and we didn't slow down. And so as the team kind of grew, we didn't really implement it. And so we kind of just stuck with it, but it's something now that it's something we have to do, and we're excited to do. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the cold call is actually writing itself, right? I mean, you could almost envision, and this is just a best shot at goal right now. You can almost envision saying something like this to a CFO who, again, they hate overpaying for stuff.
Yeah.
You can almost say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. CFO, we're seeing that companies that are using over 15 pieces of software are typically overpaying by 20 or 30% for software they forgot about. If you don't mind me asking, how are you monitoring the software that you have today?
Yeah.
Right. Like you can almost see it writing itself, they're just based on your copy. You had also mentioned LinkedIn. Is your LinkedIn strategy different?
Yeah, I'm very relaxed and very conversational through messaging. I tend to just try and write how I speak. And so for me, I tend to just engage on LinkedIn with prospects that have engaged with my emails and that are active on LinkedIn. Like they need to be visibly active, like posting or interacting with stuff at least once or twice a week for me.
So you're seeing if someone like opens your email or they're clicking around, and then what will you say in your LinkedIn message?
It varies a little bit, depending on the level of interaction. Like if they've clicked on the meeting link or they've gone to view the Cladara website, then the messaging will alter. But usually I don't want people to get freaked out if I say, "Hey, I saw you jumped on our website after I sent you this email," because it can get a bit intrusive.
Stalker.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So I tend to just say, "Hey, like thanks for connecting." I don't send a note. I never send a note with a connection request personally. And then if they accept, I just say, "Hey, thanks for connection. I sent you over an email earlier today or yesterday. If you want me to stop, let me know. But I'll also send over some more info if needed."
So you use the LinkedIn channel, it sounds like, to promote your email. You don't really, it
Yes.
doesn't sound like you message too much within LinkedIn.
No, I don't. No.
Eric, you have been so generous sharing your knowledge with the LinkedIn community. What I really liked about what you shared today was that you gave the audience a real understanding of how you think. And I know I keep talking about this, but it does bear repeating one more time. If you can understand how Eric thinks, you will be able to apply the strategy to your audience. If you don't understand how Eric thinks, what you're going to end up doing is copying and pasting his words, and they're not going to land as well because the audience that you're selling to probably isn't the same as Eric's audience. Eric, if people want to get in touch with you and learn a little bit more about what you're up to, and again, so generous of you to share this knowledge with the LinkedIn community, or they just want to say thank you. Hopefully some of you will do that without asking Eric for anything. You'll just say thank you, thank you, thank you, please. But Eric, if people want to get a hold of you, want to learn a little bit more from you, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Just LinkedIn would be the best way. I haven't been as active posting recently just because work's been very busy and that's kind of takes the priority over using LinkedIn, but I'm always active and looking on there. So connecting with you on there, dropping a follow, sending a message. Yeah, I do a lot of calls with people just to like review cadences and help people out because I wish like I had more people doing that for me when I started. And so LinkedIn is definitely the best place to go.
And if you are a company and you're listening to this and you're like, you know what, I think our company would be a good fit for this potentially. I'm not even sure. And you want to introduce the CFO to Eric, I'm sure he would not hate you for that, right, Eric? You would not hate an introduction, right?
I would not hate it. No, I would not hate it.
So yeah, so if you're working for one of these companies that's in growth mode, you see them hiring a lot of people, you think you're using a lot of software, please, tell your CFO and see if you can't set up a meeting, make an introduction. One of the best ways to use LinkedIn is to introduce people to other people, even if you have nothing to benefit from it. It always pays itself forward. So if you are one of those people working for one of those companies, ping your CFO and see if you can't get an intro to Eric. Eric, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. I really appreciate you.
Appreciate it, Josh. Thanks so much for having me on.